I have stood 4 paces from Halloran Mercer for 19 months, on the right marker of the concert court door, and in all that time I never once heard the man hum. So when the 3 of them began their work on him, the tall one in the velvet jacket, the lady with the silver lorgnette, the young man with the notebook who wrote down everything the other 2 said, I assumed they had picked the wrong post for a fight. They thought they were tormenting a fence. They did not know they were tormenting a man who had sung the role they had paid £40 to hear butchered that night. I am Talbot Reedy, 3rd file of the Sable Court detail, and I will tell it the way it happened, because I was close enough to hear every word and disciplined enough not to turn my head. The concert court of the House of Auburny is a long stone room with a vaulted ceiling and a small stage at the south end, and twice a season the house throws its doors open and lets the public buy seats to hear the season's company perform. That night it was the grand old tragic opera, the one everyone half knows, the one about the shepherd soldier who gives up his name to save a city, and the company had brought a guest tenor down from the city to sing the lead. Mercer and I held the doors. We do not watch the stage, we watch the room, that is the post. The 3 critics arrived late, which is its own kind of statement, and they did not take their seats. They stood at the back near our door with programs rolled in their fists, and the particular boredom of people who have decided in advance that they will not be impressed. The tall one, I learned his name was Varick later, when it mattered, looked Mercer up and down the way you might look at a coat rack you suspected of being in your way. Extraordinary, Varick said, not to Mercer, but loudly enough that Mercer was meant to hear it. They dressed the furniture up so beautifully here. The lady with the lorgnette laughed through her nose. The young man wrote something down. Mercer did not move. His eyes stayed forward, level on the far wall, his white gloves square on the rifle, his bearskin throwing its shadow down over a face that had decided long ago to be made of the same stone as the room. I have seen tourists try this. I have seen 100 men decide that a guardsman is a dare. What I had not seen, until that night, was the particular cruelty of people who believe that taste is the same thing as virtue. Do you suppose he can hear the music at all? The lady asked. Or is it all just noise to a man like that, boots and noise? I should think a man chosen to stand still all night, Varick said, is chosen precisely because there is nothing going on behind the eyes to disturb. You want a tone-deaf man for this, a man with no instrument in him. Stone keeps better time than feeling. Tone-deaf. He used the word like a little knife, and he was so pleased with it that he used it 3 more times in the next quarter hour. The tone-deaf man at the door, our tone-deaf sentinel. Look how the tone-deaf fellow stands so well. Perhaps he keeps better rhythm than the orchestra. The young man wrote it all down, and I understood then that the notebook was the point. That Varick was a man who reviewed concerts for one of the broadsheets, that the lady wrote for another, and that they had come not to hear the opera, but to file the cleverest possible contempt for it before the first act was through. I felt the old heat climb my own neck. We are trained to give nothing, and I gave nothing, but I will not pretend I was made of stone. I wanted to tell them what I knew about Mercer. I had known it for 19 months, and I had never spoken it because he had asked me. On the one occasion the subject came near, never to. You see, I had heard him sing exactly once. It was a Tuesday in winter, well past midnight, the court empty and locked and the company gone home, and I had come down to swap a wet glove from the guardroom and found him alone on the dark stage. He did not know I was there. He had his bearskin off and tucked under his arm, and he was standing where the tenor stands, and he was singing, low, half-voice, the way a man sings to himself when he thinks the building is asleep, the great farewell from the 3rd act, the part where the shepherd soldier lays down his name. I have no words for music. I am a man who marches, but I stood in that doorway in the cold and I could not make my feet carry me away, and when he stopped I went back upstairs without my glove and never told a soul. The next day at the change of guard I said only, I heard you last night. And Mercer, who never explained himself, looked at me for a long moment and said, Then you'll keep it. It was not a request, and I kept it. So I knew. The tone-deaf man at the door had a voice that had once made a cold stone room feel like the whole sky had opened. And the three clever people with their notebooks had no idea, and the joke of it sat in my chest like a coal. The pity of it, the lady was saying now, is that the seats are wasted on people who can't tell a great voice from a loud one. They could prop a uniform on a broom, and the crowd would clap just the same. They will clap tonight regardless, Varick said, whatever comes out of that man. He tipped his head toward the stage where the guest tenor was about to begin. I have heard him in 3 cities. He has a fine top and the soul of a cash drawer. He will hit the high note in the farewell and the room will weep, and not one of them will know it was a trick of the throat and nothing of the heart. He sighed, theatrically, for the benefit of his own notebook. There is no one left who can sing that aria as it is meant to be sung. The man who could is dead or retired, or he glanced again at Mercer, delighted with himself, standing at a door somewhere, deaf as a post, guarding a coat. He could not have known how close he had cut. I saw it only because I had been 4 paces from that face for 19 months and could read the weather on a wall no one else could read. The smallest thing, a single slow blink, the white glove on the rifle settling a 1/4 inch, the way a man's hand settles when he has decided something and is now simply waiting for the moment to arrive. The lights went down. The orchestra found its first chord, and the guest tenor walked out into the light to sing the role that Halloran Mercer had once owned in front of crowds these 3 critics would have wept to be part of. I did not know yet that by the end of the night every person in that room would know it too. I only knew, watching that glove settle, that the 3 clever people at the door had finally picked the wrong man, and that whatever was coming, I would be standing close enough to see it land. The opera ran the way operas do, which is to say slowly, and the critics did not stop. If anything, the dark gave them cover. They had pitched their voices down to a murmur a fence post was not supposed to mind, and they talked over the music the whole of the first act, the tall man delivering verdicts, the lady polishing them, the young one writing them down. I caught the rhythm of it without meaning to. Varick would say a thing. The lady would say it back to him better. The pen would scratch. And every 4th or 5th verdict came back to the man at the door, because mockery, once it finds a target that cannot answer, cannot leave it alone. "Watch the sentinel keep time," Varick murmured during a passage that needed keeping. "Better than the timpani. He doesn't feel it, you understand. He simply can't get it wrong. There's a freedom in having no ear at all." I will tell you what no one in the cheap pleasure of that joke could see. Mercer was keeping time, not with the timpani, with the conductor. I had stood beside him long enough to know the difference between a man holding still and a man holding still around something, and that night his stillness had a current under it, the way a frozen river still moves beneath the ice. Some part of him was riding the music the way a horseman rides a hard road in the dark, by feel, leaning into every turn before it came. The farewell aria was an hour off, and he was already inside it. The first act closed. The lights came half up for the interval, and the room emptied toward the long room where the house serves its small glasses of wine, and the 3 critics stayed where they were by our door, because their best material was within arm's reach of it. "He'll murder the farewell," Varick announced, of the guest tenor to no one and to all of us. "Mark me. He'll take the high phrase too fast because he's frightened of it, and he'll batter it into submission, and the herd will roar, and tomorrow I shall have to find a kind way to say that a beautiful voice was wasted on a man with the inner life of a brass fitting." He looked at Mercer. "You'd understand that, wouldn't you, friend? A fine instrument, no one home. We're practically colleagues." It was the worst thing he said all night, and he said it lightly, the way the cruelest things are always said. The lady laughed. The young man, to his small credit, did not write that one down. I saw his pen hover and then lift, and for the first time he looked at Mercer's face instead of at the back of Varick's head, and something crossed his own that was not amusement. He was the youngest of them by 20 years, and I think the night had begun. somewhere in him to turn. But Mercer gave them nothing. That is the part I keep coming back to. A lesser man, I will be honest, I am a lesser man, would have let the wall slip by a degree, would have let one muscle in the jaw answer. Mercer answered nothing. He stood as though the words were whether happening to a building, and the not answering was so total, so without effort, that it began slowly to unsettle them. You can mock a man who flinches. It is much harder to keep mocking a man who appears not to have heard you at all, because then the joke has only your own voice in it, and after a while your own voice is all you can hear. There was a thing I have not told you, because I did not understand it until later. During the interval, while the lady and Varick took their wine and sharpened the night's verdicts on each other, the young man with the notebook drifted away from them and came, almost by accident, to stand near our post. He did not speak to Mercer. He would not have dared, I think, and you do not speak to the post. But he stood a little way off, and looked at the metal ribbons on Mercer's chest with the careful attention of a man who has spent years learning to read a thing he has only just realized he never actually looked at. There was a ribbon there I had wondered about myself, once, in the way you wonder about a fellow soldier's quiet decorations. Most of Mercer's were the ordinary ones, the long service and the good conduct, the marks of a man who has stood a great many posts very well. But there was one near the top that I had never seen on any other guardsman, a deep wine color with a narrow gold thread through the center, and I had asked him about it exactly once years before, and he had said only, "An old thing. Another life," and I had let it lie, the way you let a man silence his lie. The young man looked at that ribbon for a long moment. I watched his face change. He did not say anything. He went back to his seat. But I understood, when the night was over, that he had recognized it, that it was a thing given by an academy of music to a singer of the first rank, a thing a man like that young critic would have read about and longed to see and never expected to find pinned to the chest of a sentinel at a back door. He had recognized it, and he had not said a word, and I have always thought that was the moment he stopped being the third of three clever people and started being something better. He had looked. The other two never did. The interval ended, the room filled and dimmed, and the second act began the long climb toward the third, toward the farewell, toward the scene where the shepherd soldier stands alone in the broken city and lays down his name so that the people behind the walls might keep theirs. I had been wrong about one thing. I had thought the guest tenor merely cold. He was worse than cold. He was afraid, and Varick had read him exactly. As the great aria came near, you could hear the fear creep into the voice, a hurry, a hardness, the sound of a man bracing for a fence he is not sure his horse can clear. The orchestra felt it and tightened with him. The conductor's shoulders went up. And the audience, who had come to weep, leaned forward into the famous moment with the terrible patience of people about to be let down. And here is the hardest part of the post to explain to a man who has not stood it. The whole of the second act, while the guest tenor labored toward the farewell and the critics carved him up in whispers, I could feel Mercer beside me not as a stillness but as a held thing. I have carried a heavy load on a long march and felt my own arms shake with the effort of not setting it down. That was what it was like standing next to him, the effort coming off him in waves, the effort of a man who knew, better than anyone in that room, exactly how the great aria should be sung, listening to it not be sung that way, and to three clever people explain at his elbow that no one alive could sing it at all. The discipline was not that he did not care. The discipline was that he cared more than any of them and gave no sign of it. I have respected a great many men in this service. I am not sure I have ever respected one as much as I respected Halloran Mercer in the 40 minutes before he sang, when the only thing he did was hold. Varick, near the end, leaned to the lady and said a thing I will not forgive him for, even now, even knowing how the night ended. "Listen to the herd," he said, of the audience straining toward the famous moment. "They'd weep for anything tonight. You could send the deaf sentinel up there to bray it and they'd call it a triumph. There's no taste left, only appetite." And he laughed softly, pleased, and the lady laughed with him, and 4 paces from me the man they were laughing about did not so much as blink. But I saw his jaw once set and release. One time. It was the only crack in the wall the whole night, and they never saw it, because they were too busy admiring the cleverness of their own contempt to look at the face it was aimed at. He reached the farewell. He took it, as Varick had foretold, too fast. He came to the long-held phrase at the heart of it, the one the whole opera is built to deliver, the place where the soldier gives away his name and the music is supposed to break open like a struck bell, and he did not break it open. He hit the note. He held the note. It was loud, and it was true, and it was empty. A coin dropped on marble, and he hurried off it as though it had burned him, and the moment that was meant to undo the room simply passed by and was gone. There was applause. Of course there was applause. The lady had been right about that too. But it was the applause of people clapping to cover their own disappointment, and under it, for just a second, the room held a silence that everyone felt and no one would name. They had come for the bell to break open, and it had not, and they did not know they had been robbed, only that they had. And in that silence, 4 paces to my left, the man they had called tone-deaf for 3 hours turned his head. Not far, 2 inches. Off the post, which is a thing we do not do, a thing I had never once seen him do, and toward the stage, toward the guest tenor walking off into the dark of the wings, and toward the conductor lowering his arms. It was the smallest motion in that whole great room. But I was watching for it, and Varick, who had spent the night watching the wall for any crack at all, caught it too, and he opened his mouth to make a joke of it. He never got to finish the joke, because that was the moment the door at the side of the stage opened, and the master of the court came out, and the night I am telling you about stopped being one kind of story and became another. The master of the court is an old man named Sir Aldous Frayne, white-haired, slow-moving, with a voice that has spent 50 years filling stone rooms without a microphone. He came out to the front of the stage in the held silence after the disappointing applause, and he raised one hand, and the room hushed properly now, because when the master of the court comes out unscheduled, something has changed. "My friends," he said, "I must beg your patience. We have lost a singer." A murmur. He let it run and then put it down with his hand. "Not lost in the sad way. Our guest is unwell. He has given us all that he could give tonight, and the final scene asks more of a voice than he has left in him. He has asked to be excused from the encore the house traditionally offers, and we will not press a tired man." A ripple of disappointment. The encore of the farewell, sung a second time to a stilled house, is the thing the regulars come for. Sir Aldous waited it out. "But I will not send you home without it. The house does not send people home without the farewell." He paused, and I saw the old man's eyes travel up the length of the room, over the heads of the audience, to the back, to the doors. To us. "It happens," Sir Aldous said slowly, "that there is a man in this room tonight who has sung that aria before, in rather grander rooms than this one." His eyes found Mercer and stayed. "A long time ago and under another life. I asked him before the concert whether he might consent, should the need arise, to stand in. He told me the need would not arise. The need has arisen." Every head in the concert court began to turn. 300 people, turning together, looking for the man the master of the court was looking at. And they found at the back, beside the door, between 2 stone pillars, the immaculate sentinel in the red tunic and the tall bearskin. The man the velvet-jacketed critic had spent 3 hours calling deaf as a post, furniture, a brass fitting with no one home. I heard Varick make a sound. It was not a word. It was the small dry sound a clever man makes when the ground he has been standing on all evening tilts under him, and he has not yet understood why. Mercer did not move. For a long moment he held the post the way he always held it, eyes forward, and we all thought, that the old man had made a mistake, had the wrong sentinel, had imagined the whole thing. Then Sir Aldous said one word. He said a name. He said Halloran. Not Corporal Mercer, not Guardsman. Just the given name, the way you speak to someone you have known across a great gap of years. And something in the way the old man said it, gentle and certain, and asking, reached the man at the door in a way that 3 hours of insult could not. Mercer came to attention. Then he did the thing I will remember to the end of my service. He turned to me, Talbot Reedy, third file, 4 paces to his left, and he held out his rifle. But first, the way you hand your weapon to a man you trust to hold the post while you are gone. I took it. My hands were not steady, his were. And then he reached up with both white gloves and lifted the bearskin from his head. You have to understand what that is. We do not bare our heads on duty. The bearskin is not a hat. It is the post itself, the line between the man and the uniform, and to lift it in front of 300 people is to step out of one life in front of all of them. Mercer lifted it and held it against his chest, and underneath it was not the blank stone face the critics thought they had been mocking. It was a man's face, older than I had let myself notice, lined at the eyes with the particular stillness of someone who had decided a long time ago to put a thing down, and had carried the weight of having put it down ever since. He gave me the bearskin too. And then Corporal Halloran Mercer of the Sable Court detail walked down the long center aisle of the concert court of the House of Albany, in his red tunic and his white gloves and his bare dark head, through a silence so complete I could hear his boots on the stone, toward the stage and the light and the role he had laid down. The critics were directly in his path. He had to pass within a yard of them. The lady with the lorgnette had risen halfway out of instinct and now stood frozen, the silver glass forgotten in her hand. The young man with the notebook had stopped writing. The pen hung. And Varick looked at the man he had called tone-deaf, looked at the face he had not bothered to look at all night, and I watched the recognition arrive in him in stages, the way cold water reaches you, ankles first and then all at once. Because Varick had heard this man in 3 cities, he had said so himself. He just hadn't known it was this man. Mercer did not look at them. He did not slow, he did not glance. He gave them precisely the nothing he had given them all night, only now the nothing meant something else entirely. Now it was the indifference of a man with somewhere to be, walking past 3 people who no longer existed for him, toward a thing that mattered. He passed them. He reached the steps. He climbed onto the stage into the light, and Sir Aldous put a hand briefly on his shoulder and stepped back, and the conductor looked up at the bare-headed guardsman with an expression I can only call disbelief turning into something like prayer. The orchestra found the opening of the farewell, and Halloran Mercer began to sing. I have already told you I have no words for music. I am going to fail at this part, and I want you to know I know it. But I was there, and I have to try, because what happened in that room in the next 4 minutes is the reason I am telling you any of this at all. The first phrase came out low and unhurried, the way a man speaks when he is not afraid, and the whole room understood in the first 3 notes that they had been listening to a frightened amateur all night, and were now listening to something else. The guest tenor had hit the notes. Mercer did not hit them. He opened them, the way you open a door into a room you did not know was there. There was no hurry in him because there was no fear in him. He had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. A man who had already laid this role down once and survived it, and that, it turned out, was the only way it was ever meant to be sung. By someone who had really lost the thing the song is about losing. He came toward the great held phrase, the one the guest tenor had dropped like a coin on marble. The one Varick had promised, smirking, that no one alive could sing as it was meant to be sung. And I watched the velvet-jacketed critic, the cleverest man in the room, grip the back of the seat in front of him with both hands and lean forward into the dark, no longer writing, no longer smirking, no longer anything but a man who loved music more than he had wanted us to know, waiting for the bell to break open. Mercer reached it, and he broke it open. I cannot tell you what a note is supposed to do. I only know what that one did. It went up and it held, and it did not strain, and it did not hurry, and it had inside it the whole of the thing the song is about, a man giving away his name so that others might keep theirs, the plainest and oldest of all the things a soldier understands. And it filled that stone room the way water fills a cup completely to the brim, without a single drop wasted on showing off. It was not loud. That was the secret of it. The guest tenor had been loud because he was afraid. Mercer was quiet at the heart of it because he was not, and the quiet was 100 times more than the loudness had been. The note arrived not as a feat but as a confession, and it asked nothing of the room except to be allowed to be true. I have stood at attention through state ceremonies. I have heard cannon. I have never heard a room go that still. 300 people stopped breathing at the same instant, and held, and the only sound in the concert court of the House of Albany was one man's voice giving away a name in the dark. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized that the hard heat I had carried in my chest all night, the wish to tell the clever people what they were too stupid to see, had simply melted and run out of me because he was telling them. He was telling them better than I ever could have, and he was doing it without a single word aimed at them, which is the only kind of answer a man like Mercer has ever given to anyone. He let the phrase down at last the way you set a sleeping thing into a cradle. The orchestra carried the last of it off into silence. And the silence held 1 second, 2, 3. A silence so long and so total that for a terrible moment I thought the room had not understood, that the clever sickness Varick had spread all night had finally won, and these people truly could not tell a great voice from a loud one. Then someone wept. One person, somewhere in the dark, made the small broken sound a person makes when a thing has reached past every defense and touched the place underneath. And it broke the dam. The applause that came was nothing like the polite cover fire that had followed the guest tenor. It came up out of the floor of that room like a tide, and it did not stop. People stood, not in the showy way crowds stand to be seen standing, but the way you stand when sitting has become impossible, when your body simply will not stay in the chair. Old men were on their feet. The conductor had put down his baton and was applauding his own stage. And Halloran Mercer stood in the light in his red tunic and his bare dark head, and took it the way he took everything, still, level, giving nothing away, except that I, 4 paces and now 40 paces from him, holding his rifle and his bearskin against my chest, saw his throat move once, and knew what it had cost him to put this thing down all those years ago, and what it had cost him to pick it up again for 4 minutes tonight. He bowed once shallowly, the bow of a soldier and not a star. And then he came back down the aisle to reclaim his post. The critics were still in his path. The lady with the lorgnette was weeping openly and had stopped trying to hide it. The silver glass dangled from her fingers, forgotten, a clever little instrument for keeping the world at a distance, useless now. The young man with the notebook was on his feet applauding with the rest, and his notebook had fallen to the floor at his feet, and he had not bent to pick it up. And I thought, that one will be all right. That one learned the thing tonight that the other 2 spent careers avoiding. And Varick had not moved from where he gripped the seat back. He was not applauding. He was staring at Mercer coming back up the aisle toward him with an expression I had never expected to see on so guarded a face. The expression of a man meeting the cost of his own cleverness all at once. The man who had said lightly, smirking, for the pleasure of his own notebook, that the only person who could sing that aria as it was meant to be sung was dead, or retired, or standing at a door somewhere, deaf as a post, guarding a coat. He had been right. That was the unbearable part for him, I think. He had been exactly right in every particular and had not known it, and had spent the right answer as a joke about a man he could not be bothered to look at. Mercer reached the back of the room. He stopped in front of me and took back his rifle, and I settled the bearskin onto his head with my own hands because his were full, and he became again, in 3 seconds, the immaculate sentinel by the door, eyes forward, the post resumed as though he had never left it. The whole of his other life folded itself back up and went away inside the stillness and was gone. And it was Varick who broke. He stepped out of his row. He came to stand in front of Mercer close, the way he had stood close all night to mock him, except that everything in the man was different now. The velvet jacket suddenly too much, the rolled program crushed in his fist. He opened his mouth. I braced, out of long habit, for whatever a clever man says when he has been made a fool of in front of 300 people. "I reviewed you," Varick said. His voice was not steady. "Years ago, in the city, I wrote—" He stopped and swallowed and made himself go on because I think it was the only honest thing left to him to do. "I wrote that yours was the finest farewell of your generation. I wrote that hearing it was the reason a man goes to the opera at all. And tonight I stood at your door for 3 hours and called you furniture." He looked at the bearskin, the rifle, the stone face. "Why did you let me?" For a moment I did not think Mercer would answer at all. He is not a man who explains himself. He had told me as much, on a cold morning 19 months ago, with a single sentence and a look. The post does not speak. The post is not permitted to speak, and even if it were, Halloran Mercer would not have spent words on a man who had spent so many on him. But the room was quiet, and the old singer who had laid down his name once and meant it looked at the clever, broken man in front of him, and he gave him, quietly, levelly, without a flicker of triumph in it, the only answer he had. "Because I am not furniture when no one is watching," Mercer said, "and I am not a singer when they are. I am the man at the door either way." His eyes did not leave the far wall. "You only ever saw the door." That was all. Varick stood there a moment longer, and then he did a thing I would not have believed of him at the start of the night. He straightened the crushed program in his hands, smoothed it flat against his thigh as though it mattered, and he gave Halloran Mercer a small, stiff, unpracticed bow, the bow of a man who has spent his life judging and has just discovered, late and hard, what it is to be judged and found wanting. Then he gathered the weeping lady and the young man with the fallen notebook, and the 3 of them went out into the night, and the door I was guarding closed behind them. The rest of the house drifted out slowly, the way people leave a place they are not ready to leave. Many of them came past our post to look at Mercer, not to mock now, but the way you look at a thing you cannot quite believe you have seen. He gave them all the same level nothing. He was the sentinel again, and he would not trade on the 4 minutes, not for a single nod. By the time the last of them had gone and Sir Aldous had come to shake his hand at the door, the bearskin was square on his head, and the white gloves were on the rifle, and you would never have known, to look at him, that the man behind the stone had emptied his whole, buried life into that room and walked back to his marker without a word. "You said the need would not arise," Sir Aldous said to him, quietly smiling. "I was wrong," Mercer said. "It arose. It will arise again. The house would have you sing whenever you'll consent to it." "The house has me at this door," Mercer said. "That is the post I asked for." And the old man understood, because old men do, that this was not modesty and not refusal but something harder and cleaner than either. A man who had chosen, with both eyes open, the quiet work over the bright one, and did not regret the choice, and would not have it admired. I asked him much later, on another cold night with the court locked and empty, why he had ever given it up, the rooms, the crowds, the bell breaking open 4 nights a week. He was a long time answering. "Because every night they cheered," he finally said. "They were cheering the note, not the name in it." I gave away the soldier's name 1,000 times for people who thought it was about the note. He looked out at the dark stage where I had once heard him sing alone at midnight, thinking no one could hear. "Out here I give it away for real. No one cheers. No one's meant to. That's how I know it counts." The reviews ran 2 days later, and they were not what anyone expected. The lady with the lorgnette wrote nothing at all that week, which for her was a kind of confession. The young man with the notebook wrote a piece, his first that anyone remembered, about a voice he had heard at the back of a concert hall and what it had taught him about the difference between cleverness and listening, and he never once gave the singer's name, because by then he understood that the man would not have wanted it given. And Varick wrote a single short column, the shortest of his career. He did not describe the performance. He did not review it. He wrote only that he had spent 30 years learning to hear, and had discovered in one evening that he had never once learned to look, and that there was a man in this city who could teach the difference, but would not, because teaching it was beneath the dignity of simply living it. He retired from the broadsheet within the year. I do not know if the two things are connected. I have always chosen to believe they are. As for me, Talbot Reedy, third file, 4 paces to his left, I have stood that post beside Halloran Mercer for 19 months and now for many more, and I have never once heard him hum. I do not need to. I held his rifle while he gave away a name to 300 strangers, and I settled his bearskin back onto his head when he came home to the door. And I know now what the clever people with their notebooks will never know, what you cannot file or review or polish into a phrase. That the greatest voice in that room all night belonged to the one man they were sure had no instrument in him at all, and that he had laid it down on purpose to stand guard over things that matter more than being heard. They called him tone-deaf. He sang the lead, and then he picked up his rifle and went back to the door, where the real work is, and where the best of us never ask to be applauded for the things they have quietly decided to give away.